All right, we are live on our Facebook, Chris. Hello, how are you, Chris?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm also fine, thank you very much. I'm very happy to see you. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation and being our guest speaker. It's so wonderful to have you today. And let's wait a few minutes, just our viewers can join us. So it takes some time.
Sounds good. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always nice to be a guest in Kyrgyzstan, although it's nicer to be a guest in person.
Yes. True. Oh, our first viewer join us. Good evening, dear friends, Bishkek American Center fans. Hope you're all doing great and well. Thank you for joining our virtual program today. And we come back with our regular program, virtual US state tours. And today we are going to visit Colorado State. And I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker today, Chris Edling. Um, he will make a presentation about Colorado State, and let me give you a brief background about Chris. He currently teaches writing at New York University, and from 2009 to 12, he served as Peace Corps volunteer in Armenia. And before coming to New York University, he completed a Fulbright Arts Fellowship in Kyrgyzstan. Once again, thank you very much, Chris. And also, I would like to kindly remind our friends, so please send your questions during the live in the comment section, and after the presentation, Chris will answer them. And thank you very much, everyone. So let's start our session.
Great. Thanks so much, Aida. And thanks to everybody who's coming out to learn a little bit about Colorado, which is actually not where I am right now. Right now, I'm at home in New York, but excuse me, Colorado is where I lived when I was a teenager, and it's always the place I go to when I go home to visit my mom and my brother. So I'm always happy to share with people about Colorado, the state which I always think of as a home for myself. Okay, so if I can do this, I'm going to share the screen because I have just a short presentation. Let me see. I want to do this. How's that? Can you see my screen?
Yes, Chris.
Okay.
It works.
All right. So virtually, I'd like to welcome everybody to Colorado. As I have a short slide about myself, as Aida mentioned, my name is Chris. I'm a writer and an editor and a teacher. Right now, I teach writing at New York University in New York City, which is where I am now at home. I did a Fulbright Fellowship in Kyrgyzstan from 2015 to 2016. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Armenia some years before that. And I also lived in some other states other than Colorado. So I lived in Florida for many years. I lived in California. But Colorado is the state I'm going to talk about today. Anybody who's watching, if you want to add me as a friend on Facebook or LinkedIn, feel free to find me and add me. I'm always happy to have new friends, especially in Kyrgyzstan. So, a brief disclaimer before I get started. I am not an official representative of the U.S. Embassy, Kyrgyz Republic. Opinions expressed are solely my own and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. Embassy, Kyrgyz Republic. So everything I'm saying is from me. It's not from anyone else. Okay. To quickly get started, I thought it would be helpful to try to present Colorado somehow in comparison to Kyrgyzstan, because there are some ways in which Colorado and Kyrgyzstan have some things in common. So, for example, the population of the state of Colorado and the nation of Kyrgyzstan are very close. They're both roughly 6 million people in each place. The geography is very similar also. So like Kyrgyzstan, the country, Colorado, the state, is landlocked. It's surrounded by other states, the way that Kyrgyzstan is surrounded by other countries. There are a lot of mountains and rivers. The climate is more dry rather than humid, and it can be very hot sometimes in the summer and very cold in the winter. There are some differences between Kyrgyzstan and Colorado. So, for example, Colorado is a bit larger. It's one of the larger states in the United States. I think it's one of the top 10 sort of largest in terms of how many miles, square kilometers it is. The elevation of our capital city of Denver is a bit higher than the elevation of Bishkek. However, the overall elevation of Kyrgyzstan is higher. So, of course, Kyrgyzstan has so many beautiful mountains and high elevation places. And Colorado does also, but the general elevation is also a bit lower. This is partially because about half of Colorado is in the mountains, and the other half of Colorado is more flat. It slopes towards the Great Plains of the United States, so towards Nebraska and Kansas. So, what is Colorado famous for? Well, of course, very similar to Kyrgyzstan, Colorado is famous for its beautiful landscapes and its nature, and maybe one of the most famous states that has the Rocky Mountains. There are a lot of beautiful animals in Colorado: bear, elk, bighorn sheep, mountain goats, the American bison, and mountain lions, all call Colorado home. And people who love these wild animals often go to Colorado hoping to see them. People who are interested in outdoor sports, especially outdoor sports that involve mountains. So, for example, skiing, hiking, or climbing, mountain biking, all of these sports are have a famous destination in Colorado. Colorado is also one of the states that has one of the sort of longest and richest histories of the Wild West. So for people who are interested in this old kind of Wild West culture, Colorado is a place that comes up a lot. A lot of the famous Wild West movies from old Hollywood and from newer Hollywood often are set in Colorado. It's one of the states that most often comes up. Colorado is also famous for having had a history of mining, and current mining also, but especially the history. And similar to California, there was a big gold rush, also a silver rush, of people who went to Colorado when people started discovering gold and silver in the land there. So, of course, Kyrgyzstan also has a very strong mining industry, and so this is something that it also shares with Colorado. The Native American culture, of course, throughout the United States has a very long and rich history. This is especially true in Colorado. There are places where Native American tribes live, and there are also prehistoric dwellings and some of the homes that are preserved from the Native Americans from quite a long time ago. So people who are interested in certain Native American cultures, I think especially the Ute tribe, for example, has a very long history in Colorado, and that history continues to this day. More from pop culture side, Colorado became famous for the cartoon show South Park. And in some years earlier than that, there's another TV show called Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, which actually my mom saw, and it was one of the reasons I think she got interested in moving our family to Colorado. So, Denver, the capital of Colorado, is called the Mile High City, famously because it sits at a 1 mile elevation above sea level. So this is something that people always know about Colorado, even if they haven't been to Colorado. Usually they've heard of this. In terms of things that local people who live in Colorado are aware of about the state, or things that they often observe while they're living there. Um, the weather can change very quickly in Colorado. So, for example, when I was in high school, it was very common for, you know, my friends to dress up in all of these different layers of clothing. And they would know that maybe one part of the day it would be hot and you would be walking around just in a t-shirt and jeans. And then at some point later in the day, the temperature could drop and it would be snowing. Then you'd have to have your coat on. So this was kind of always a running joke. People said, if you don't like the weather in Colorado, just wait an hour and it'll change. But as a result of this, you often see people in Colorado dressing, people having a jacket handy, or they're wearing a t-shirt underneath other things in case the weather changes and they need to get more comfortable. Another thing that people in Colorado are often aware of and comment on is that these wild animals that live in Colorado are everywhere. So even in cities. So for example, this picture over here on the upper left-hand corner of these deer, this picture was actually taken very close to my mom's place. She lives in Colorado Springs, which is the second largest city in Colorado. So it's not, out in the woods so much, but even still, it's very common to see deer and bear just coming through the cities. People in Colorado are always aware of the elevation and the fact that it has a high number of mountains. So, for example, for leisure activities and recreation, people will often do things in the mountains. Another thing that comes up a lot is that because of the high elevation, people who visit Colorado and who aren't from there, sometimes they feel the effects of going from one elevation to another. So, for example, now that I live in New York, sometimes when I go to Colorado, I feel a bit dizzy, or sometimes I get a bit of like a headache or something, just going from the lower elevation to this higher mountain elevation. So I think this is something too that people are aware of when they go to Colorado. However, a good side of this is because Colorado is so high, it helps make the stargazing very beautiful. So if you happen to be somewhere in Colorado and it's at night and you're away from some of the bigger cities where there's a lot of light pollution, you can see a very beautiful night sky, which of course also is true in a lot of Kyrgyzstan. The longest street in the United States is located in Denver, the capital city. It's 43 kilometers long. It's called Colfax. And in terms of cuisine, of course, Colorado, like a lot of the United States, you can find lots of different types of cuisine from different parts of the world, different kinds of American cuisine. But I think maybe one of the most prominent types of food is Mexican food. So Colorado, of course, before it became part of the United States, there was, it was part of Mexico, or a lot of it was part of Mexico. And there continues to be a large influence from Mexican culture and Hispanic population. So in quite a lot of places throughout the state, you can go and find very good Mexican food. And actually, it's one of the things that I miss sometimes when I'm away from Colorado and some other places, is being able to find a really wonderful Mexican restaurant or something like this. So I wanted to take also some time to speak more specifically about the city that I lived in. Colorado Springs, it has kind of its own very unique history, which I thought would be interesting to talk about. Some of the other towns in Colorado are famous for different things. So, for example, Denver, the capital city, also has a very rich history. Some of the other mining towns in Colorado have their own interesting history. Boulder, which is where the University of Colorado is centrally located. They also have kind of their own interesting culture and personality. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Colorado Springs, which is the place where I lived. So Colorado Springs is one of the fastest growing cities in the United States right now. When I lived in Colorado 20 years ago, which seems like a long time, but it also feels like yesterday, there were about 360,000 people in the city, and now there are more than 475,000. And actually, the metro area, this like larger Colorado Springs area, including surrounding towns and suburbs, I think is more than 600,000 people. So actually, it's growing quite a lot. One of the major roads in the city that used to be, sort of out in the wilderness has now become a more central part of the city. There's a lot of business there. Around the year 1900, there's a famous inventor named Nikola Tesla who had a lot of interesting inventions and patents. He went to Colorado Springs and he conducted a lot of experiments with wireless electricity. So, for example, famously, one of the things he did was to put some light bulbs on the ground in the middle of an open area and transmit electricity to them to light them up as a way of demonstrating that he could transmit electricity without wires. It was quite a big deal at the time. Colorado Springs also has a large military and aerospace industry. So you can see this picture here on the lower left-hand side is this picture inside Cheyenne Mountain. So Cheyenne Mountain is a military complex. A lot of the operations that used to operate there were moved some years ago, but there's still this very large facility inside of the mountain. And it's a very cool place to read about. If you're interested, you can read many articles online about Cheyenne Mountain. There's a long history there with the military and also the development of satellite communications and all of this. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to read about Cheyenne Mountain. If you're interested in sports, especially Olympic sports, Colorado Springs also has a very interesting facility. The Olympic Training Center is there in Colorado. And one of the reasons that it is centered in Colorado is because the elevation, of course, is very high. And so athletes who are training at this higher elevation, it's very good for their training to be at this higher elevation. Very similar to Kyrgyzstan, of course, too. So many great athletes come from Kyrgyzstan and train in Kyrgyzstan, and having this high elevation contributes to that, right? Another interesting thing that I found out actually when I got my Fulbright to come to Kyrgyzstan is that Colorado City is a sister city of Bishkek. So these two cities have this kind of municipal relationship with each other. And actually, I didn't know that when I lived there as a teenager, but I found out later when I was doing my Fulbright. So I wanted to wrap up the presentation with a couple of just interesting facts, some things that I was discovering about the state of Colorado when I was preparing for this presentation. None of the presidents or the vice presidents, I think, but none of the presidents of the United States ever came from Colorado. So a lot of other US states have contributed one or more presidents. And very often states can be very proud of this. So having this president or that president from the state, we have none. Colorado has none. None of the presidents so far have come from Colorado. Also in Colorado, you can walk in the footsteps of dinosaurs. So there are some places where dinosaurs lived, and a lot of these archaeological sites are fairly well preserved. So you can see this picture on the left, for example, is a researcher looking into one of these sites. There are these also very well preserved fossil areas in Colorado. So there's a lot of archaeology in Colorado. Quite a lot of dinosaurs have been, their skeletons have been dug up and discovered there. There are ghost towns all over Colorado. So this is a result of the rush of people who are going to do mining in the state back in the 1800s. So at that time, when gold was discovered and silver was discovered, a lot of people came to Colorado trying to find gold and get rich, and all of these towns popped up very quickly, and they were busy and heavily populated for a while. But then over time, as the mining went away and some of these mines closed, people left, the towns were just left abandoned. And so a lot of these towns, you can drive through them now and you see the buildings are still standing, the houses are still there, and people refer to them as the ghost towns. So there's a picture of one of them here on the slide. The Continental Divide runs through Colorado. So the Continental Divide, for the geography of the United States, is this significant sort of dividing line between the East and the West. So to the east of the Continental Divide, all of the major water, for example, rivers and things like this, it all eventually flows to the Atlantic Ocean, which is the ocean on the eastern side of the country. To the west of the Colorado Divide, the water eventually flows to the Pacific Ocean. And so the Continental Divide is the exact sort of place that divides one from the other. One other fun, interesting fact that I discovered actually when I was there in Colorado on my most recent visit is that the only super maximum security prison in the United States, so this is like the most secure, the one with the most security, all of this, the only one that's left in the United States is in Colorado. It's in the town of Florence, which is south of Colorado Springs. So I thought that was interesting. I think it's something that a lot of locals know and they talk about and they joke about, but I certainly found it very, very interesting to think about that. That is most of what I wanted to say about Colorado. What I have on this slide is a photo of the Colorado mountains from my most recent visit to Colorado, which wasn't too long ago. So that's all I have. That's all I had prepared. I'll turn it back over to Aida. And thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions, I'm eager to hear them and to talk about them.
Oh, thank you very much, Chris, for an incredible presentation. It was really interesting to listen about Colorado State, and I really like the fact about dinosaurs. It's so interesting. Thank you very much for amazing journey to Colorado. We started to receive questions and comments. So the first comment, hey Chris, how nice to see and listen to you.
Hi Gulzad, nice to see you too. Well, I'm not seeing you, but it would be nice to catch up sometime. I miss Kyrgyzstan so much, especially all of my good friends like you.
Yes. And the first question, hi Chris, I have read that farmers in Denver grow sunflowers a lot, and there are many pictures of sunflower fields once you Google Colorado. Is it for producing sunflower oil or other local products?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know. I think because I personally, I never worked in this industry of agriculture, so I'm not sure, but it's possible. And I can say it is true. You do see a lot of sunflowers in Colorado. So for example, when I was visiting Colorado the last time, I was driving on there's this famous highway in Colorado that goes through the mountains. It's called Highway 50. Actually, if you can read about it online, there also has a very interesting history. So now the United States has this system of interstate freeways, which were built during, I think, the 20th century. But before that, there was this big system of the U.S. highways. And one of the most famous U.S. highways, which went from the East Coast to the West Coast, is called Highway 50. There's a stretch of this which is referred to as the loneliest highway in America because it goes through this part of the West where there's just, there aren't like towns or cities or anything like this. Anyway, when I was driving on Highway 50 on my recent trip, I saw quite a lot of sunflowers. And actually, there are these fields you go by. I don't know if they belong to a person or if they were growing wild, but you just see sunflowers, like the big ones, for like these huge fields. It's very beautiful. So it's true they're there, but I have no idea what they do with them.
Thank you, Chris,
Yeah.
for honest answer.
Yeah. What can I say?
The next question. Great presentation, Chris. Thanks for the informative information. Could you tell about famous writers of Colorado?
Boy, that's a good question. Let's see. Off the top of my head, there are probably a lot of famous writers who I'm not going to think of right away. I should have researched this before the presentation, but there are some people who quickly come to mind. So there's a famous science fiction writer named Robert Heinlein. He lived in Colorado Springs for many years, my city. He was a great and prolific writer of science fiction. If you've ever read, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, or any of these famous books of his. So he has a Colorado history. I know also that there's a current writer named Peter Hessler, who he's a journalist. He's written many books about China. He wrote one book about Egypt. His writing is interesting to me because he was also a Peace Corps volunteer, as I was many years ago. He was a Peace Corps volunteer in China, and then he continued to write about China. But he lived for many years also in Colorado. There's this small town near the San Juan Mountains called Ridgway, and I know or I've read that he had a home there. So he was there, and then let me think. There's another writer who has written about writing, but has also done his own writing, named Verlin Klinkenborg. He's lived in Colorado for many years. I'm trying to think. Those are the people who quickly come to mind. There are probably I know Hunter S. Thompson, the famous writer from the 20th century. He lived in Colorado for some time, as did quite a lot of the people who were part of the New Journalism movement and the beat writers. People who are finding this spiritual awakening and part of the counterculture movement. Colorado was a great center for a lot of that movement. But it's a great question. After this presentation, I'm going to go look up writers from Colorado, and then I'm going to go, oh yeah, right, I should have thought of them. But those are the people who come to mind very quickly, and I really do recommend looking up all of these people, actually. So Klinkenborg, Robert Heinlein, and Peter Hessler. Their writing is all worth looking up for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris. The next comment. Hi, Chris. Thank you for taking the time to talk about Colorado. Hope you will visit us soon.
Juzum Khan, me too. I also would be very happy to visit all of you. I miss all of you a lot, and Juzum Khan and Aygrim and Gulzad, these are among the wonderful people I met when I was in Kyrgyzstan. I was very lucky to meet. So any of you who meet them, you're very lucky also.
Yeah, they are. Thank you very much, Chris. The next question. Good evening. Thank you for an amazing session. Each state is unique by itself. I wonder why there weren't any presidents from Colorado.
Thank you for your question. I think this was from Aygul. So it's a great question. I mean, I don't know why, or if there's I don't know if there's an easy answer to explain. Although I will say that historically, I mean, Colorado wasn't a U.S. state until it was around the time just after the American Civil War. So, for example, if you think that the history of the United States of America with the European settlers, all of this starting around 1776, if that's kind of our marker for governance beginning formally and all of this. Colorado didn't become a state until 100 years after that. So I believe Colorado became a state officially in 1876, 100 years after that. And for that reason, the nickname of Colorado is the Centennial State, because it became a state 100 years after the forming of the country. So I think that might be part of it. If you think that, for a lot of the country's history, Colorado wasn't a state. And then in the time before it was a state, it was this kind of like a territory. Part of the territory of Colorado was part of one treaty and purchase, and another part of Colorado was part of another treaty and a purchase. So Colorado got a bit of a later start, I guess you could say, compared to some of the other states, especially more towards the east, right? So I think that's probably part of it. We haven't had as much of a chance to produce presidents yet. I'm sure that there are more. I think if I were had more time and wanted to think more deeply about it, I could probably speculate on other reasons related to, for example, the culture of Colorado and factors like education and things like that, because becoming a U.S. president sometimes involves this very specific kind of trajectory of being educated and going into government and all of that sort of thing. And some parts of the United States might, I don't know. I think there's population too. Colorado, despite being very large geographically, it's not the most densely populated state. It's growing now. It's growing very quickly, but historically we haven't had as many people as some other states. So I think, the two things quickly that come to mind are it's a younger state comparatively, and we don't have as many people as a state like New York, for example.
I see. Thank you very much, Chris, for your answer. The next question, what attracts people the most of all in Colorado?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think different people go to Colorado looking for different things. I think famously probably people who want to be close to the mountains and are attracted to this mountain landscape. I think that can be one of the big attractions to Colorado. So, not all of the United States has high and beautiful mountains in it. The geography of the United States is very diverse. So, for example, there are states which are very flat and don't have mountains. There are states that have a lot of swampland, places that are more like a desert. Colorado actually also has a lot of desert territory. But I think the nature. I think one of the reasons that Colorado is growing so much now was also sometimes it's just for these practical reasons, right? So there are companies and industries which were located in some other states, and now they're moving their operations to Colorado. And so sometimes people are following their jobs to Colorado. Another thing is military. There's quite a lot of military in Colorado. So sometimes people who are in the military end up in Colorado, and maybe they'll stay there if they, once they retire from the military, for example. Actually, I know that the person who owned my mom's house before we moved in there in the 1990s, he had been in the military before. So that's a big thing. And I think too, just the financial reasons sometimes. So it can be very expensive to live in some parts of the country. So California, for example, some parts of California, some parts of New York, like where I live, New York City, can be a very expensive place to live. So especially as people, if they get married, if they have children, they're thinking like, how to make a nice life for their family. Colorado is one of the places that sometimes people can move to for, as they say, better quality of life, right? Compared to some of the more expensive places. Although now Colorado is also getting expensive, so this problem can extend anywhere.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris. And also, I noticed that the mountains of Colorado and Kyrgyzstan are very similar. They have similar nature.
Yeah, I always made this joke when I was living in Kyrgyzstan that it kind of felt like home to me, like very naturally. And I think the mountains and the nature was part of this. I felt that in Armenia, a similar thing. Armenia also has very beautiful mountains, and I felt some of the same familiar, nostalgic feeling when I was living there also.
Thank you, Chris. Sorry if I missed this part. Could you tell us about iconic Colorado food, about local cuisine?
Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I guess I probably could have spent more time talking about food. The only thing I mentioned was the Mexican food, local. So, like in Texas, they have this kind of cuisine which is sometimes called Tex-Mex, like Texas Mexican. There's also similarly a Colorado Mex kind of food. One of the Colorado dishes that's I think maybe most well known and people know Colorado for specifically is this green chili. So yeah, I mean Colorado is a very metropolitan uh, state in a way, especially because of the military, and there's this kind of international presence there. So you will find, especially in the larger cities like Denver, Colorado Springs, Boulder, where the university is, you will find cuisine from all over the world, and you'll find a lot of, I think maybe referred to now as American cuisine, but like I think when I think of Colorado personally, I mean when I think of like the food that's there, which is really good, which I miss a lot. It's very often Mexican food, and of course that's related to the longer history of Colorado, as well as the uh, um, continuing like large, very population of Hispanic and specifically of Mexican people.
Thank you very much, Chris, for your answer. The next question, amazing library. Can you please share what you usually read? Who is your
Oh,
favorite author?
thank you. Yeah, my I think this is maybe very a common thing for lots of people, that especially teachers and writers, just having this kind of long, like library books I have behind me. So I actually, when I teach my, right now a lot of people are teaching classes online. I also, for my university, I will be teaching classes online this semester. And so the books that my students read, I keep exactly here on this shelf behind me. So when my students are talking about what they read, I say, oh, I pull the book down and I open it and I say, can you say what page it is? Let's all look at it together. So this is a bit of my online work setup, practically speaking. But let's see. My favorite author. It's a difficult question. One of the authors I always return to for me is E.B. White. He was a journalist and a humor writer. He also wrote children's books. So Charlotte's Web, which a lot of people know partially because of the movie or movies. He wrote Charlotte's Web. He wrote quite a lot of books for children, but also he was an essayist. He was a great essayist and a commentator on American culture. He also co-authored a book about grammar and style in writing, which I have right behind me here on my bookshelf. So the Elements of Style by William Strunk and E.B. White. There are lots of wonderful books about writing. This is one that was very popular when I was in school. One of my teachers gave me a copy of this, and it taught me a lot of tricks about like sort of the mechanics and the style of writing. And so I think I've always loved E.B. White, not only for his what he produced as a writer and the kind of writing he does. So being an essayist and being a humorist, these are kinds of writing that are also very close to my heart. But also for his, he was a great technician of writing. So I always liked him for that reason too. So I'll stick with him as my answer. But there are a lot of other writers who I love a lot, of course. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris, for showing your amazing library. It's really cool.
Thank you.
We received one more question. Hello, what subjects do you teach?
Thanks, Dinar, for the question. I teach writing at the university. So my university, like many universities in the United States, we have exactly a program for the teaching of academic and expository writing. So these are classes that students take to learn how to write the kind of writing you do when you're in college and later in graduate school, professionally, as researchers. So the classes I teach are for that. It teaches essay writing, how to write research papers, and dealing with different kinds of media and things like that. So yeah, it's a class I love teaching. Right now, the class I'm teaching is specifically for students who English is not maybe their first language. It may be another language for them. So I teach a lot of students who come to our university from China and Korea and other countries. So yeah, so exactly, I teach writing specifically. And I'm happy to say, when I was in Kyrgyzstan, I had an opportunity to work with many teachers there to talk about how to teach writing specifically. And I found it was a great experience. There are so many wonderful educators in Kyrgyzstan who are very curious and keen on developing writing skills. And so that was a kind of a great wonderland for me to be a part of as a person who also loves to teach writing.
Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, I agree with you that our educators are very active. The next question, could you please share online reading resources for students learning English?
That's a good question. I mean, that would probably, I would want to take some time to formally assemble something like this. But I mean, I think also I was always very impressed with the online resources that teachers in Kyrgyzstan told me about. I find that and I found the same was true in Armenia also. So I learned quite a lot from educators there. I think quite a lot of you who are there, you are all very savvy about finding things online. I was usually learning from you. So in a way, I kind of want to turn the question around and ask you, like, what are the online sources for learning English? Because I find that a lot of you are very savvy at finding things like that. But I will say that when I was living in other countries like Kyrgyzstan or Armenia, and I was learning other languages, the things that helped me most in learning the languages it was really immersing myself in the world of that language, right? So, for example, as a writer, I'm always very keen on reading literature and poetry. So reading literature in that language, I found interesting and useful. I was always learning lots of new vocabulary, but also just spending time with the people who speak that language, right? So when I was learning Armenian, being around a lot of Armenian speakers was very helpful to me. And I think that that's helpful for English learners also. The more you can immerse yourself in the world of English language with people, or through movies or music or literature, news media, whatever it is that you can do to just kind of get acquainted with it. I mean, learning a language, there's this part of it that's like, it's like making a friend, right? You can't do it without spending time with them. So make friends with English and all of the all of the places that expose you to English. That's what I would say.
Yes, it's really great. Thank you very much, Chris. Yes, I agree that it's a great way to learn English. I mean, not only English, other languages as well.
Yeah.
The next question is Madeleine Albright kind of famous person in Denver?
I'm sure she is for some people. I'm sure that's true. I don't know that everybody in the United States or even everybody in Colorado would associate Madeleine Albright with Colorado or necessarily that she's famous to everybody in general. But yeah, I'm sure that that's probably true for people, for example, who work in government or who are interested in government and things like this. I think, who is famous to you or who is important to you on some level, sometimes that depends on what interests you, right? So for me, there are a lot of the fact that Heinlein, the writer, that he spent time in Colorado, like for me, that's famous, but it's because I'm interested in writing, right? So yeah, but I think probably there are a good number of people who, for whom Madeleine Albright is famous and generally a famous person, right? Not to take anything away from her, but it depends what you're interested in, I think.
Thank you very much, Chris. The next. Hello, guys. I'm glad to see you. Where are you working right now?
If the question is for, I don't know if it's for me or if it's for Aida. I guess Aida, they know you're working. Everybody knows where you're working, right? But right now I teach at New York University, NYU, which is in New York City. Yeah, I've been here for 3 years. I've been teaching here since 2017.
Thank you, Chris. The next question. Today is the 100th anniversary of the passage of the 19th Amendment, guarantees all American women have the right to vote. Is it true that it was signed first in Colorado?
I don't know. For some reason, I thought. I don't know because I'm not a historian, and specifically, I'm not a political historian. So I'm not sure. It might be true. For some reason, I had some other piece of history memorized. Like I think there was one of the states out in the West which was the first to the sort of like where women had the right to vote. It might have been Utah or Wyoming. And they were sort of like famous for this, for women voting there first. But in terms of the 19th Amendment, and in relation to that, I'm not sure. It might be true, but wherever it happened, I think we can all agree that thank goodness women have the right to vote.
Yes, thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
The next question. Do you write books, poems, or short stories?
That's a good question. So within writing, the I guess area of writing that most interests me is nonfiction writing. So I tend not to write short stories or novels or fiction. I do love poetry. I have written poetry and I love to read poetry, but most of my interests in writing are in different genres of nonfiction. So, for example, essays, journalism, memoir. I mean, nonfiction is sort of this large umbrella that includes a lot of different kinds of writing, and it's very exciting to be a student of nonfiction writing here right now, because there was a time in the past, of course, where when people thought of literature, they would think only of plays, novels, short stories, and poems, right? And me too. Like when I was a student at school, when I went to literature class, mostly what we read was, fiction and poetry and drama. And while all of that has, so much wonderful writing, and of course, Shakespeare wrote a lot in all of these genres, right? There is also this great legacy of different kinds of nonfiction writing, and I think that that's really sort of coming to the fore now, especially here in the United States. People are appreciating and producing and recognizing nonfiction writing also as a very beautiful part of literature. And so, as a nonfiction writer and a teacher of nonfiction writing, I'm very excited to see that. The way I always explain it to people is, if you go to a bookstore, you have the section which is fiction. You have the section which is, poetry, and maybe a section of drama, theater. The rest of the bookstore, most of that is nonfiction, right? So food writing, nature writing, memoirs, journalism, essays, criticism. This is all types of nonfiction writing, and it's right now is a very exciting time in this collection of fields. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Chris. The next question: what are your top tips for effective writing, or your personal strategy, if something specific?
Let's see. Well, I mean, one of the things I always tell my students is, writing is always very relative to what you're writing for and who you're writing for, right? So I think instead of trying to teach general writing tips, which which is its own kind of thing, it's very helpful to think of your writing in terms of what are the goals of the thing that you're writing, and who is your audience, right? Who are your readers? And to keep that in mind when you are writing and when you're editing, right? So and having time to edit and to plan your writing is also an important thing. So one of the main things I teach in my class is not just about the product of writing, like let's look at this piece of writing which is produced and what it is, but we look also at the process of writing. So, for example, having time at the beginning of the writing process to brainstorm, to have ideas, then taking time to outline those ideas or put them in a specific order and pick which things you're going to write about, putting similar ideas together in the same paragraph. So each paragraph has a main topic or a main idea. Then after you have your outline, writing a draft, like a first draft of whatever it is that you're writing, if it's a letter or an essay or anything, and then spending time to go back and read what you wrote, edit it, change it, and especially changing it, keeping in mind the person or the people who are going to read it, right? So I think, I mean, just as a quick answer right now, I mean, if we were doing kind of like a full seminar or a workshop, it would be fun to sit with a group of all of you. I mean, those of you who are attending right now or other people who are interested, and collect different ideas about the writing process. But just as a short preliminary answer, I would say, keep in mind the goals of your writing, and who are you writing for, and make sure you take time, if you can, to plan out your writing and have it in different stages. So brainstorming, outlining, writing, and revising. I think maybe that's the most basic tips I would give, just as a short answer, for example. I could say a lot more if we had 14 weeks for a class, which is what I do in my classes.
Yes, thank you very much, Chris, for your recommendations. The next question: Have you been writing journal, diary during the COVID-19 period?
Uh, that is a great question. So, two things I'll say to answer that question. One is that I did when the COVID pandemic was first starting to get big here in the United States. It was like middle of March, and I was in the middle of my semester at the university. So we switched all of our classes to online, as so many people did. Um, and I got this idea from my boss actually. So the person who had been head of the writing program, she wrote an article and she was talking about how she was writing to her students every day. This is the former head of the writing program at NYU, and I thought that was such a neat idea. I think I'm lazier than she is, and so I wasn't writing to my students every day, but I did write to my students at the end of every week. Usually on like Friday, I would send an email to my students just sharing something about the pandemic and how we're all going through this, and what are some ideas for how we can maintain kind of our mental health and how we can keep up with our work and all of this kind of thing. So I was in the habit of writing to my students every week during the spring semester. I'm not sure, I haven't made a decision yet about whether I'll do it this semester because it looks like the class I'm teaching might just be entirely online for the whole semester. And that dynamic feels different to me than a class which was in person and then, went online. So that's one part of my answer is I was doing this kind of weekly writing to my students, and I was encouraging them also to write because a lot of writers and a lot of historians were writing on the internet, encouraging people to keep a diary of this because this is history that's happening right now, and someday, those of us especially who are like if you're younger, if you're living into the future, and if you're having like children and grandchildren, they may be curious about this. What was it like? What was it like living during the COVID pandemic? And if you have it all written down, then you have this record of it, right? So I was encouraging my students to write. The other thing I was doing for a long time was I was taking a lot of photos. So this was especially true in the first few months. I'm here in New York City, and I've been here during the pandemic. So New York City, as some of you who are watching probably know, we had a very big spike in the virus, and things got very scary here, in like March, April, and then the rate went down a bit. But during that time when businesses were closing and the streets were empty, and you could see out in the world when you're walking around. New York City is a great walking city, and I love to walk around. And so I'd walk around and I would take pictures of what does the city look like. So it's kind of like a photo diary or a photo journal of this city during the COVID era. So that was the other thing I was doing. So I was writing to my students, and I was taking quite a lot of photographs. So I would be curious to hear from some of you, those of you who are watching in Kyrgyzstan, what are the things you have been doing to bear witness to the pandemic, and to also to do something to keep your like peace of mind, because it's easy to go crazy these days. And having like a personal expression and outlet for that, or if you've been doing something just to keep a record for history, for future people, future generations. I wonder what other people are doing,
Yes. Thank you very much, Chris, for your answer. And we have the last question for you. What is critical writing?
Yeah. So, the class that I teach is we always talk about it as expository writing and critical thinking, right? So we might think of, I think in the most general sense, critical thinking and this kind of writing that goes along with it is how we come across ideas and information in the world, which we need to like think about in some way that's objective. And how do we come to conclusions about what the truth is when the truth isn't obvious? So, for example, if I have, let me see, if I have a book here, just for example. So I have this book, right? And if I have to ask, what is this book? I just look at the book and I say, oh, it's a thesaurus, right? And there's nothing I necessarily need to figure out. I observe that is a thesaurus. So there might not be much to figure out in terms of that question. But if I have, this thesaurus and somewhere in my shelf, I have another thesaurus. So imagine I'm holding it up. So if I have these two books, and I say, which thesaurus is better, right? That's not an easy answer necessarily, right? And different people might come to different conclusions about which thesaurus is the better thesaurus. And critical thinking is exactly the process we use when we encounter these things in life, where you want to come to an answer usually by making an argument, and the answer isn't obvious. And you might be dealing with a lot of different variables. You might be dealing with some uncertainty, information which is conflicting with each other. But ultimately, you're trying to use some evidence or some facts and try to come to a conclusion, right? So this kind of writing, which is based on critical thinking, the kind of writing that my students do, is usually exactly this. So they'll read some text, or they will encounter some idea in the world where people don't all agree on it. And there are different opinions, and there's some controversy or something like this. And so then my students have the job of using writing as a tool of figuring out what the best answer is and what the truth is, right? And that usually involves using some kind of evidence. So finding information which is relevant and reliable, and saying, here's my question. For this, and this reason, this evidence, my conclusion is this. So, critical thinking and reasoning, and logic. That's the kind of writing that students do in my class, and I think in a lot of classes where we think of as like critical writing, but it's turning your brain on and using logic and evidence to come to conclusions when conclusions aren't easy to come to.
I see. Thank you very much, Chris. One more question. Hello, Chris. I'm very glad to see your successes in your work. Do you remember we organized a class on topic kidnapping is crime or tradition? How can we organize critical thinking in class? Is such talking clubs?
Yeah. Hi, Nirmira. It's nice to hear from you. Nirmira was part of a very wonderful session we did with her students about the practice of bride kidnapping in Kyrgyzstan. As for the question of critical thinking with talking clubs, I think it's a wonderful idea. In terms of how to do it, I mean, the thing I would probably recommend, here in the United States, it's very common for schools to have these kinds of clubs that are debate clubs, right? And forensics. So where students take some complicated question and they argue back and forth about it, right? I always thought, I never really had a good chance to do it in Kyrgyzstan because my work there is focused on something else. But if you could organize a debate club and keep the students doing it in English language, I always thought that would be a great way to practice critical thinking, because it's precisely when people have to make an argument and defend a position that they use critical thinking skills. So to Nurmira and anyone else who's watching, if you're interested in using English, as a way to practice critical thinking skills, I think starting a debate club is one idea. Because the students might get really into it and not just thinking about their English, but thinking about the ideas that they're talking about also. So if you do it, please let me know. Keep me posted, Nurmira.
Thank you, Chris. The next question, what kinds of online platforms do you use?
Well, I don't know. It's like, I don't know, like, you mean in general, or I don't know if the online platforms is for a specific purpose. I mean,
For teaching, I think.
yeah. So I'm not sure how to best answer it. I mean, like most people, I read the news sometimes online, and I use a lot of online tools right now for teaching, which I'm sure a lot of you are also doing, those of you who are teachers and students. But I'm not sure how to best answer the question. But also Nurmira is my friend, and we can talk on Facebook later if I don't get a chance to answer the question well.
Thank you, Chris. I'm proud of you. You're the best teacher.
You're very sweet, Nurmira. You're a good you're a great teacher too. I was so impressed with the session we did, and your students were all so bright and very open-minded. Actually, Nurmira's this class we did about bride kidnapping, it's a great example of critical thinking. So, not just saying something is a tradition because people tell you it's a tradition, but actually if you think critically about it or look at evidence, to say, well, is this really a tradition or it's not a tradition? Because in any place, in any culture, traditions are always changing, right? And cultures are always evolving. They're not static. So Nurmira's class and the work she does with her students, I can say, is a great example of that. So feeling is mutual.
It's wonderful. Thank you very much, Chris. This was last comment. And I think it's time to close up our session. Thank you very much, Chris. It was really amazing, fascinating session and very informative, very interesting. We started with Colorado State and finished with critical writing. Thank you very
Yeah.
much. It was really cool. Thank you very much, Chris. And also, I would like to say thank you to our viewers for your active participation, for your great questions. And bye bye, everyone. See you
Thank
in
you.
our next sessions. Bye bye. Have a great
Bye.
evening
Thank you
and
so
day.
much.